Hello, everyone. Thank you very, very much for coming along to this session on career development and career focus in 2023, but I think the planning for that can start now. As you can see, my name's Russell Dethridge. I've been working in people development for about 22 years, full-time. Before that, I worked for various organizations and different careers, 15 years as an actor, and then working for Lloyds Bank and Travelers Insurance. But as I say, in the last few years, I've been working with LHH in a number of spheres, but one of my passions is around career focus. So what we're going to do today, I'll just bring up my slides, copies of which we will be sharing with you. Let me just take that down. Copies of which we'll be sharing with you after the session, so you can have a go on that. But just pausing while the slides load again, which is great. There they are. So hopefully you can see the slides up in front of you. So today we're looking at maximizing your career focus in 2023. And I'm going to ask you a question, and you can pop the answers into the chat function. I can see we've got around about 57 people with us, so that's fantastic. In the chat function, rather than the Q&A, how long per week, as a percentage of your working week, do you spend thinking about your own career, your own development? How long per week do you think about your own development as a percentage? So we've got Tracy clears, 0 to 5%. Karen, 25%. Oh, I beg your pardon, 0.25%, 5%, 20%. Laura, can I ask Laura McLean, can you just bring yourself off mute? You said 25% there. Just tell me about that. Oh, I don't think you can bring yourself off mute. I beg your pardon. But we may have some down here. This is great. We've got some ranges from 5% to 1%, 2%. Sometimes 0% from some people, 30%. It's amazing, isn't it? The average seems to be, I would say, around about 8%, given the people who are responding. It's an interesting piece, and something that since the pandemic, since about the end of 2020, what we've noticed is people are starting to give much more focus and much more thought to where they want to take their career. Personally, having worked in this sphere for some time, I think that move was coming anyway, but I think the pandemic, like with many topics, put rocket boosters underneath it, and it really started to take hold as a consideration for people. I think we all know some people putting 30%, other people putting 0.25%. We all know that feeling more in control of our career gives us that greater strength, greater sense of ownership and empowerment. My move, by the way, from being an actor, which I was reasonably successful at, to working in people development was a conscious move in about the year 2000, because to be honest, I wasn't feeling fulfilled in the previous acting world. And I found that as I was working more in coaching and training and development, I was getting much more satisfaction from it. But it took somebody else, took my sister, who's about 5 years older than me, to point out one Christmas in about 1999, when you're doing your acting work, Russell, you don't seem content. When you're doing your training work, you seem really content. So it made me think about my career and what I wanted to do 22 or 3 years ago with the rest of my professional life. And this image came to my mind of what a career is. And I always like different words and the way they are used and so on. And I thought, well, career can mean like a car going off the road and collapsing into some sort of heap down the bottom of a valley. Or it can mean a career where I take things more seriously and I define myself in terms of what makes me happy. So we're looking at our experience, our interests, even our values, our expectations in education, the skills we need to develop, and our overall personal and professional goals. There are 3 areas I'd like really to share with you this afternoon. And the first is, what steps can you take to recognize different career options? Secondly, how you manage multiple career interests effectively through a portfolio career. And finally, what conversations do you need to have either with your employer or somebody you trust who can give you valuable advice, guidance, and maybe recommendations? Now, as we go through this afternoon session, you can wear two hats almost simultaneously. You can wear your own personal hat, which is about your own development, and you can wear kind of a manager hat or an employee hat and think about career development, career focus in whatever organization that you currently are in. So you can wear both. You can look, maybe I'll change the analogy, not hats, but lenses. So through your own lens and your personal development and through your work lens when you think about the organization. And the program itself is in about 3 stages. And we've got about an hour, just under now. The first stage I'd like to look at is, in terms of different career options, looking at what really drives our satisfaction and what really drives our engagement for sustained periods. And I love this Carl Jung quote, who looks outside dreams, and dreams are sometimes good to have and think about, but to look inside awakes. And maybe that awakening, I've always thought, can bring the dreams closer to hand to make them more reality. Knowing who I am, how I am changing, and how that affects what I want to do with my career, I think is really important. I remember hosting a career session once, and it was quite lively. It was face-to-face, quite a lively session, only about 10 or 15 people in the group. But what we found out, I posed this question. I said, how do you people approach your career development? And a few people said, oh, I just go with the flow. And I thought, okay. And then somebody else pointed their hand up and said, the problem with going with the flow is it's a bit like a dead fish. You might end up stuck in a gully somewhere. And I thought that was a really interesting piece. Do we want to go with the flow or maybe swim in the river? So who's responsible for people's career development? Now, you might want to think of this, first of all, from the perspective of your own organization. We believe, and lots of research shows, that yes, employee accountability is huge. I think I left college in 1985, and I think back then, employer accountability, it was lower. People often expected an organization to tell the employee where they were supposed to go next and what they were going to do next. The agency around an employee perspective was not that great. Managers can enable that as well, but also, as I've indicated, there needs to be organizational support. So if we bring these things together, we call this the partnership model, where the employee looks at their own career goals, there is self-assessment, there's skills updating, brand building. The idea of brand, I often caution the word of brand. I think it's profile. Brand always implies something that's done to cows when they brand cows in the farm and so on. And then also network building. And by networking, I don't mean standing in some bland hotel foyer somewhere with a badly scrawled sticker on my lapel with my name on, holding a glass of warm white wine, thinking, I'm not quite sure why I'm here. Networking is really about connection and maintaining those connections. Manager enabling is having conversations with our line reports that are meaningful and fulfilling and can give direction on what is motivating people. In my experience, managers are much more comfortable even having disciplinary conversations than they are having career development conversations. And I often say, why is that? Are you reticent about having this career conversation? And they say, well, if I lift that lid, they might leave. People might leave. I don't want them to leave my team. Well, my response to that is they're probably going to leave anyway. Maybe if you talk to them, you might stay that for a while, or even they might stay with you altogether. Exposure, learning opportunities, and supporting career goals is the way, and other ways managers can help. And then overall, in terms of organizational support, we've got HR programs, mentoring, networking, stretch assignments, and processes. Now, when I look down the chat function, I can see people's names, but I can't see from where you are located, from any organization. So I'd like you to share with us. You can do it to everyone, or you can just do it to me personally. I think I'll be on the host and panelists. Oh, Jackie, somebody's raised their hand. I think maybe that was done by mistake. But in the chat function, it'd be great to just to hear from you, from your organizational perspective, where you think your organization does well in this partner support. Is it doing well in overall organization? Is it doing well in enabling managers to have those conversations? And does it place emphasis on employee accountability? So in the chat, and you can either put it to the panelists or to myself or to everyone, where do you think you do well? Where could there be more focus? Laura saying, yeah, I think it was earlier on. Yeah, thank you. And thanks very much for the little little note. Okay, so people starting there, I think we need to improve in all aspects, touching all three, but not in any sufficient depth in any area. This is great. Thank you for people responding like this. Doing well with employee, but not so good in organizational support. Yeah, so, and if the employees are going for that, but it's not being supported kind of in an overarching way, that might be somewhat frustrating for people. Employee mainly, support is there, all three is evidence in organization, but a bit of the all three. This is great. I think, okay, so we've just got one in the question and answers. Somebody's put there just to me, I think we can do better on coaching and mentoring our people. We also don't educate our line managers enough. I think this is really key. There's a program we run called Talent Builder, which is aimed directly at the line managers of people who are going through some sort of career development. And it's a very pragmatic session where we furnish people with the questions they can open coaching conversations with when they are looking at developing people. So Anita, fantastic response there. Doing well in providing resources. However, we need to do more on providing actual opportunities. Absolutely. And I think people seeing a way through their career development is important. So thanks ever so much for kind of keeping these ideas coming. I have to hold 2 career development conversations a year with the reports. That's fantastic. So let's take a look at maybe what the individual, but also what the line manager would be looking for in these conversations. First of all, I think one of the big influences on me and the way I think about career development is the work of David Thompson, who wrote the book Career Helium, How to Float Past Others in Your Quest to Reach the Top, however you define the top. And that is having to have a combination of, just take something down, being able to navigate the politics of an organization, how to connect with each other, the networking piece, how we are profiled. Do people know who we are? Are we both seen and heard in the right way? What are our expectations and what are the expectations of the organization? And where does the manager fit with those conversations? So I've got there just briefly the things that Thompson talks about in the work, how things really get done and so on. So it's a good kind of touchstone, that work, for kind of really thinking about some of these questions in depth. But from an LHH point of view, one of the first things we ask people to do, and sadly there won't be time to do it today, but you might want to do this after the session, is to think about your career journey to date. And I often ask people actually to draw it out a bit like I've done here, because that bird's eye view can actually start to give us an insight better than a mere list about what's worked and what hasn't. So this is a combination of myself and a colleague. The reason I combine them, because of after the pandemic, a colleague made a big change in their career. So this kind of person, Russell stroke so-and-so, leaves university at a particular point and joins a training delivery company and receives a promotion. Fantastic. Some really good insight there, things that worked, things that didn't, what worked and what didn't. Then take a promotion and at a new company, bad move, values not matched. This was my move. I took a promotion here at the end of this role, and there was a drop down. Within 2 or 3 days, I recognized the values did not match mine, not in terms of the way we were treating our consumers, something I didn't know before I went in, and maybe I should have been more forthright in asking at interview. But then I moved to a new leadership development company, really focused on certain areas, and I really liked the work that they did. And they, in turn, were bought by a bigger organization, and provided promotion for me and so on. But then we leave the merger. And this is where I brought in another of my colleagues who then, during the pandemic, had a complete career change to become a fitness instructor. She'd had sort of a portfolio career when these things were kind of moving together. But given the pandemic, she decided this is what she would go for. So why am I asking you to do this? First reason is, once you've done this, mapped this out, one evening, sitting with a beverage of your choice, what common themes at the highs and lows do you see? Are there any commonalities at those peaks and troughs that give you an insight into what works for you and what doesn't? And therefore, what can you learn from that? When you were making career decisions, were you driving the changes or were they done to you? So there have been times in my career with mergers or with takeovers when my role has been under review and I've then exited the business and found somewhere else. So I suppose that was done to me. Other times I've been very much in the driving seat in the right way, not careering off the road, but driving in the direction I wanted to take things. I remember somebody saying to me years ago, Russell, one of the best things to do is stop running away from things and start running to things in your career, which is so obvious, but sometimes we don't remember that. What could you do? What could you adjust in the future in the way that you look at your next career move? And maybe what is next for you? So this evening or over the weekend, you might want to think about those areas. Now then, one of the things you might find is that where things have worked, where things really do connect with you, is where these three things align. So where your interests, your passions, also what I would call your short-term motivators, are really met and maybe enhanced. Our natural preferences we gravitate toward and enjoy doing, they're not necessarily kind of traits in an assessment sense, but these are things that you're interested. They might change. Do you like working with people? Do you like working with ideas? Do you like working with data? Do you like building things and making things? Do you like all four? And do you get access to that? Values are deeply held beliefs that guide our day-to-day choices in life and work, where the organization you work for not only has the values, but actually demonstrates them and lives them. And then your style, the personality, why and how we do what we do, our temperament, our nature, who we are, where we're allowed to be ourselves. And I think we've got the time. This point, I won't ask you to share because it's really very personal. Think about that career line and think about things where you were really happy, really content in a role. And think about these three elements, these three ingredients. Did they form a part of what makes you happy? The values, your style, and your interests. And I can see I've just got something. Somebody's just shared with the panelists, my values did not align with theirs. I knew after a few weeks, most difficult and miserable point in my career, but led to huge learning about myself. Absolutely. I'd never have worked for myself that hadn't even crossed my mind. That was a long time ago, and I've had three some great thing there. Thank you very much for that person who's sharing that with us. I can see something in the question and answer. Absolutely, Maru. You will be getting a copy of these slides afterwards. So the flip side of the same question, where you've been really happy, also where you've been really unhappy, where your interests haven't been satisfied, the values differ, and the style and personality isn't who you are. So this is something in sessions we do on Career Focus that we spend some time on. Usually it's about half a day, something like that, maybe even a day. And we talk about what people's interests are and the various kind of insights and assessments that we can do in situ. But then, of course, we need to come to the next question, which is, let's focus in not only kind of on the broad areas, interests, values, and style, but also things that are working for you at the moment. You'll see on the board are 4 boxes. It's a training session. There's got to be a 4-box matrix. It's the law. And what we've got here is on the top left-hand side, maybe after this session, think about those things that in your current role at the moment keep you really engaged. Those things where you have high interest and high skill. So for me, I'm what's known as a solution lead at LHH, and things that keep me really interested, and I hope I've got a high skill in it, are things like this: facilitating events, either short or long, but also mentoring and coaching. And I think that is of such high interest to me. I can't see that changing anytime soon. The top right, I think this is really interesting. We're seeing more and more people have a greater opinion on this top right, upskill me box, than ever before, certainly than before the pandemic, where people have a high interest in something, but a low or lower skill. So for me, I would love to develop my conflict resolution skills to be properly qualified in that area. And it's something that I've shared with my line manager, and we can start to work on to do that. There is something that I can bring to LHH as a facilitator in that regard once I achieve my qualifications. But also, if I'm absolutely honest, I'm 58 now. If I retire in the next 7 or 8 years, maybe a bit longer, what am I going to do then? And do I want to work for myself beforehand? It could help me do that. Interesting. People find these next 2 boxes hard, but I think it's important. And I think if you think about the teams that maybe you're in or that maybe you lead, I think we should still ask these questions, but it might take a little bit more time. First of all, the bottom left, where people are disengaged, where they have a low interest, but a high skill. So it's something they have become tired of, as it were. They can really do it, but they've gone past where it's fulfilling for them. And then misaligned. In my experience, there are very few items in people's job roles that what they actually do that sit in the misaligned, where people have low interest and low skill. You might have a high skill in doing your expenses and stuff like that, but you've got low interest in it, but we learn how to do it. But where things are low interest and low skill, those are few and far between. But when they do exist, can be a great demotivator for people. Okay, so have a think, maybe just about your own, for yourself, or maybe somebody reports into you. Maybe you could use these 4 questions just to, or 4 areas, just to maybe engage them. What's working? What could work even better if they were exposed to it? What's disengaging for people, but you might have to kind of rub along with it for a while, but what really isn't working? Some lovely comments from people to myself and my colleagues. Someone said there, I've realized today that all my career moves have been placed on me due to promotions, organizational design changes. Absolutely. And I mean, that can happen. But as we're moving into those roles, we need to say, well, how can I shape this? How will this work for both parties? So we're about just under halfway through. And if you want to, I'll just pause now. Are there any questions just before we move on to the next stage about this model or the previous one where we looked at interests, values, and style? Here's a quick question. Can the misaligned still be a skill you need for your next move, even though you're not interested? The answer to that is, I would think, yes. However, if I were mentoring, if I were coaching somebody in a career coaching situation, where I would hope we could take that conversation is, then is it really the right career move for you? If that is a big part of what the next move is for you, is that really right for you? So I think that's where I'd go with that. Is it something that can be dismantled from the next role, can move to somewhere else to make it more suitable for you? Or is it something that needs to remain there? If something was misaligned and it was a key career move for someone, I'd move away from coaching and into mentoring at this point. I'd be starting to say, is this really the right move for you then? So the question's anonymous. I hope that begins to answer that question. It can be, but is it then worth it? Are you walking along a really wobbly bridge that makes you feel unsafe as you're going into that new role? Any other questions? I had one, but it disappeared. Okay, for time, we'll now move on. And I'll come to this point. Know and use your strengths to boost your confidence. Do you know your strengths and your passions and what you bring to the workplace? Employees at organizations which allow them to play to their strengths are 17% more engaged and are 36% more productive. It seems self-evident. It seems so much common sense when you sit in a sort of training session like today. But we know that common sense, when we get back into the workplace can be a place where sense can cease to be common. And what we think we're doing, and what we're actually doing, are two separate things entirely. But this brings us on to questions that people often ask me. Russell, I've decided that these are my interests. I've decided this is where I'm engaged. This is where I need to be upskilled. I can deal with the sort of disengaged bits. I can kind of rub along with those, and I can move out the misaligned piece. But how do I bring myself and my CV, my resume, to life in order to make me an attractive proposition? And I think this is where we need to work, I think, almost every week. I also think this tool that I'll share with you now, you may have seen it in other guises elsewhere, it can be really important in shoring up our resilience during really tough times. I don't know if you've ever had one of those weeks where you get the reverse Midas touch, where Midas would touch everything and it would turn to gold, figuratively, and so everything's working. And other times you touch everything and it turns to dust. You're having just one of those days, one of those weeks. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves of the things we are good at. So the SOAR model is a way of preparing for when that job opportunity arises, which could be very quick. And what I recommend people do is, at the end of a week, maybe the end of a project, certainly, end of a piece of work you've been focusing on, you sit back and take stock of what you've achieved during that time. So the S stands for the situation in which you found yourself, working with the client, working with an internal piece, whatever it is, the specific obstacles that you had to overcome. You put that in the next column. So situation, working with this column, they wanted some training delivered. The obstacles were quite a limited budget in a short amount of time. From my perspective, what were the particular actions you took to manage or overcome the obstacles? Try not to say I resolved, or try to use action verbs, saying I resolved or analyzed, rather than this happened next. And by all means, recognize when a team helped with this solution, but also don't hide your light under a bushel, but make sure that you are really promoting yourself in this as well. And this part here, the results, is the part that most people find really difficult. Actually being really specific about the impact that your actions took. I saved £50,000 for the organization. I cut 2 weeks off a particular process, whatever it is, rather than a rather bland piece, which is, and everything worked out fine. So what I would like you to do is spend just a minute thinking about one example of something that you are really proud of. You don't need to be War and Peace, but I do want you to really focus on the results. So did you make money for the organization? Did you save money? Did you increase engagement? Did you resolve a conflict issue that allowed other things then to happen? Whatever that was. And while you're doing that, just very quietly move to the next slide. And this is something I've developed for myself. My soar story grid. I've de-facilitatorized it, invented a new word there, de-facilitatorized it, so that anyone can use it. Down the left-hand side of a spreadsheet that I've got are a number of soar stories, which get, every 2 weeks or so, refreshed. I've got more than 6. I've got a number of them. They go on. Things that are very old or kind of lose their agency, I start to archive somewhat. I've also got across the top various competencies that I think somebody in my role, and maybe the roles I want to go into in the future, the competencies that are required for that role. I then think, okay, I've got source story number 1. I was working with client X, Y, and Z. The story this focuses on, the competencies or behaviors that this story focuses on are, for example, communication skills or decision-making skills. So I'll highlight that. Source story number 2 could be analytical skills, coaching skills, so on and so forth. So as I'm building this, I've got an overview of strong competency areas where I've got examples and maybe where I need to find a few more. Now, why is this important? This is important because when opportunities arise for a moving career, as we know, they can come out of nowhere. People can just go, something's been put on the internal portal, and I think you're the ideal for it. And it's all moving very, very quick. And we're so focused on the process of applying for the role and sharpening things up, we often leave the rehearsal of the question, the actual interview, right to the last minute. And I think that's a mistake. If we can keep a live CV, as it were, under source stories, however you want to do, and you practice those source stories, I think that is incredibly useful. I remember when I was promoted internally within LHH, I had the interview and they said, give us an example of where you've shown such and such competency. And I remember thinking, well, actually, I've got 3 because I could choose from 3 competencies. And I said, which one would you like? There's this client, or there's this internal piece. Which story would you like to hear? And they went, oh, how about the middle one? So I taught them that. And they went, oh, how about the third one then? And it's a really powerful moment of being able to articulate your CV and where to bring it to life. This is my top tip, or one of my top tips I will give you here, bringing source stories to life. Any questions just about this? Oh, here's something in the chat function. Thank you. Just going back one, the results. When you build enough source stories, then what you can do is to sit back and say, where there is commonality of competency, what does this show about me? Does it show diligence? Does it show customer focus? Does it show creative thinking? What does that show? Because that then starts to give you a list of transferable skills, which I think leads us to this idea that maybe we could have portfolio careers where we're moving kind of alongside in non-competing but different spheres. we are noticing that more and more people are moving into maybe working for their main employer a bit less during the week and having other businesses or other spheres of interest in other times. But let's move on. We're about 25 minutes towards the end. So the next area I want to look at is this idea of portfolio careers and career choices. The famous phrase, choose a job you love and you'll never have to work another day in your life. It's not what you achieve, it's what you overcome. You work to become, not to acquire, and find out what you like doing best and get someone to pay you for doing it. I think all of those are real kind of sit back and reflect on our own career quotes. So, as we know, and it's really accelerated, the world of work has changed and will continue to change. I always think it's a good idea when you're looking at where you want to take your career. Don't look at it from now, the autumn of 2022. How is your industry or profession going to be different in 2025? In the past, we've seen lots of different changes: career agility, more dynamic teams, partners and freelancers, career webs, not ladders, so not working up a vertical ladder, but actually moving sideways, portfolio careers, as we mentioned before, and maybe people even delaying their retirement. Role agility, structured around projects rather than intact teams, behaviors and values over skills, experimentation and responsibility, maybe enterprise or intrapreneurship as well, the role agility, and then people agility. As many of you around the electronic table this afternoon will know, cross-generational working. I think for the first time we've got 4 perhaps generations sitting in one team, one figurative office, working much more globally. Culture and gender and various other forms of diversity, and, as we know, virtual teams. Way before the pandemic, by the way, just on the point of virtual teams, I was working with one big retailer whose name I won't share with you, but it is a household name. And they were and are still planning on global virtual teams they know will never, ever meet. It's not that we work hybrid and come in every Wednesday afternoon. This team knowingly will never meet, but they will be sustained. It's not just a project team, it will be sustained. And that is still how this big organization is starting to think. It's back office in terms of what they do, but it's still there on the cards. They would never meet as a point of strategy. So keeping these things in mind, I think, is important in when we're looking at what our next career move might be. Now, this is key. So many people, I think, and I don't know if it's a mistake or whether it is habit, tend to think, or it's the way organizations are structured, tend to think that vertical development in terms of promotion is everything that's needed. By vertical, I mean we move to the next level of authority, whether that's into a management position or not. But we know there are lots and lots of other different approaches we can take. Now then, I want you, and again, this is quite personal, so I'm not going to ask you to share this. I want you to, as I describe these 6 options, I really want you to think about yourself, first of all, and where your next career move, what that might look like. You might also want to do it in terms of maybe 1 or 2 people in your team, can be a direct report or maybe even a colleague. So the first one is a lateral move, pretty easy to understand. You remain at the same grade, as it were, but maybe move to a different part of the business. So for myself at LHH, I work in the leadership development part of the organization. There's another part of the organization called Career Transition and Mobility. So it would be at a solution lead level or equivalent, and moving from leadership development across to what we call CT&M, Career Transition and Mobility, but on the same level of responsibility and so on. Enrichment means staying where I am, but actually maybe becoming a subject matter expert, having a deep dive into a particular sphere. So it might be that in 2023, in agreement with my line manager, I become really focused on delivering career focus, the module on which this session is based, or talent builder, the one that's around coaches coaching their teams in career focus as well. So maybe it would be that. So going into that, not vertical, into that vertical, I beg your pardon. Exploration is an interesting one, where you stay in the same role, but actually you add to it. You maybe shape the role. Somebody asked me about what if something's misaligned and it's still part of it. Maybe that, if it's possible, can be put aside in some instances, not all the time, or you could add to it. So this is about kind of shaping the role to your skills. Realignment, big rise in the questionnaires we sent out in relation to these 6, big rise in people focusing on this since the pandemic. This is where we step back from the role that we're in. Either we stay at the same grade and we reduce our hours, or we go from a grade 3, if 3 is high, to a grade 1 and reduce our responsibilities. We're seeing lots and lots of those moves happening since the pandemic. I mentioned the vertical, but there's also relocation. Relocation can mean 2 things. One, it can mean people are leaving the organization. They've had their time with the organization and it's now time to move on. And it is their choice to do that. Or it's a big geographical move, a move from a different part of the world or a different part of the country. So what I'd ask you to think about is, what is your next move? And in the chat function, you can ask me anything you like. Anything you like. Again, I won't break up. Well, I don't know. It's just got anonymous in terms of the questions. But think about lateral enrichment, exploration, realignment, vertical, and relocation. Maybe highlight 1 or 2 where you want to take your career, and ask me any questions you like about it. So I can see there's a first one coming in. Okay, so somebody's asked me in the chat function, what if you don't know where you want to go next? There's a couple of things that we can look at. If you go back to the 4-box matrix that we talked about, engagement, upskill me, and so on. If you go back to that and focus on the areas that you really like doing, and then looking at the bottom 2, then peel out all the things you don't like doing, that might give you an area that you might want to focus on. Then you look at where you are within your profession. It can be within your organization, or more widely, if you are thinking of moving from your organization to somewhere else. And then look at the job opportunities that arise there. Let's say you're going to stay within the organization. So you've got your 2 areas, upskill me and engaged. So you know those areas are really key for you with your interests and so on. Now, does that mean then that the best way to move forward would be to become a subject matter expert, to become enriched in a particular area? Does it mean that you have to explore more, maybe go and do a short-term job swap or something like that? Is that what you need to do? It is looking, if it was a vertical move, how comfortable you are moving up to that next level of authority or power. So I think it takes some reflection. There are various questionnaires we're not allowed to sign out on sessions like this, various questionnaires related to this that if you were to be in touch with, we could start to look at, which would start to pinpoint. Oftentimes, based on those questionnaires, however, I've only ever seen one when I've used this questionnaire where there's one item that's really way out in front for one person. Usually there are clusters. You get about 2 or 3 clustered together and another 2 or 3. So if you don't know where to go next, I would say, first of all, work out where you certainly don't want to go. That's the disengaged and the misaligned. And then look at what's really working for you in the engaged and the upskill. Then look at whether it's in your own organization or elsewhere. Does that mean enrichment, staying at the same level, or exploration, moving kind of wider? Is it a vertical move? Is it a realignment? Another question, open question to me, but I won't mention the name. How do you balance career choices with financial objectives, especially in the current cost of living situation? I think this becomes a wider piece. Something else we can look at is, in terms of your values and what's important to people, where are you focused? So in the short term, over the next 2 years, I think, just listening to the news at lunchtime, it's going to be tough for all of us economically. So perhaps we are staying where we are, in terms of not wanting to risk things, and that the financial security is okay, could be a bit better, but is okay. Or if we do need to increase our earning capacity, what are we willing to trade off in order to do that? That is a really tough choice. If we go back to those interests I talk about, if you can divide them up into your head against 4 areas: working with people, working with ideas, working with data, and building things. That, I mean, it's quite specific, that it's building things, usually in the logistics world and so on like that. What are you willing to trade off against those key interests? Are you really interested in working with people? Would taking a higher paid role reduce that ability, or would it increase that ability? If you're comfortable in reducing it somewhat, then it might be the move for you. The same with ideas. Ideas is really about problem solving, inventing new product, inventing new way of doing things, and so on. If you are managing those considerations, is being further away from that going to hurt you if you're going to increase your earning power? Usually, with the reason I was hesitating then, usually with ideas, there tends to be an uplift in what people can potentially be earning. So the person who asked that question, I think you need to sit down and look at those shorter term motivations. What are you interested in? What your values are, and your style and personality. Within the interests, it's, do you like working with people, ideas, data, or things? And what are you willing to trade? It's a really tough decision. But my feeling is it would be worse to be earning more money, but incredibly unhappy, than being where you are, being okay. But that would be a choice. If I were in a career coaching situation with that person, we'd have to work through ourselves. Okay, so we've got some others. Starting my maternity. Okay, thank you. So somebody's just said that they're just starting first-time mom, their maternity leave. But during that maternity leave, if you have time, because I know it can be very busy time on maternity leave, but you might want to think about, so what's next for me? A member of my family had a big change in their personal life. They were quite senior where they were, pretty close personal family member. And I was talking to them about this just over a drink one evening. And they took the realignment piece really seriously and stepped back from being a director to being a solo contributor, I think it was, just for a short time, while they got their private life sorted. And they said to me afterwards, that space really helped. I did have to take a cut in wages. So her and her husband worked out what they needed financially compared with what they wanted. And for that short period, it really worked. I know there's a question in the question and answer piece, so I'll come to it in just a moment. Somebody's got here, forced relocation due to site closure, would like to reconsider realignment, but financially cannot afford to. Again, I think that goes back to the answer I gave earlier. That's not an easy piece to do, but I think we would need to sit down and work out all the balances of that, of what's going to be working for you and what we are trading off. A few years ago, I was working in a place that was really totally alien to my values. I knew within about 3 or 4 weeks. Somebody mentioned in a private comment earlier they had a similar situation. I stuck it out for about a year, but then I was talking over a coffee with a former colleague, and I said, I'm just going to have to go. The only job that I like the look of is actually quite a big financial cut for me, but I'm really unhappy here. So I had to do that. And my friend who I was having coffee with, she said, I guarantee that in a year after you join this new company, you'll be up to at least the base level you were on from the old company. And that worked because something just clicked there. I was much more determined and much more driven. So let me take a look at the Q&A. Yeah, absolutely. So somebody's asked in the Q&A anonymously, enrichment in learning and development, what could that entail? There are so many areas to decide on, which makes it difficult. So if I put that into a larger context, if you look at where you would like to take your career in the more longer term, what would be in L&D, what would be the most strong stepping stones or secure stepping stones to make that happen? I think this is true in lots of walks of life, to be honest. I've done a lot of work with pharmaceutical companies, both operationally and in research and development. And actually, if you're thinking about how your career is moving, there are certain things that need to be on your resume, your CV. So it might be in L&D that there would be a focus for a 2-year period on designing, maintaining, and curating online content. For example, it might be that you are in procurement within L&D and so on. Maybe there are areas that you want to look at that could build kind of a forward movement in where you want to take a career if you wanted to become a director of a particular area. So let's take a look at, there's another question. Whoops. Sorry, I can't just get rid of it. There it is. So, I think that's done. Okay. So just moving on now, because I'm aware we've only got about 14 minutes left. I've got lots of boxes open. But portfolio careers, a new way to think, talk about, and most importantly, craft your professional future in order to navigate our ever-changing world of work with purpose, clarity, and flexibility. Whereas a career path tends to be a singular pursuit, a career portfolio is a never-ending source of discovery and fulfillment. It represents a vast, diverse professional journey, including the various twists and turns, whether made by choice or by circumstance. So it's saying, do I have to be devoted to one particular track, or are there a number of things I'd like to look at? My nephew, who's 30, I think he's got right now a portfolio career because he's got 3 entirely separate, they don't really overlap, one in retail, one in the world of art, and the other one in the world of sport. And he manages those fantastically well. And that's how he and many people he's kind of been at uni with are starting to look at their career, and he gets fulfillment from it. Oh, I think I've got another question. Okay. No. So a portfolio career is a way to define a career that has encompassed several related or unrelated jobs, also known effectively as slashers. People with a portfolio career may boast various job titles: writer, photographer, graphic designer, stylist, and so on. There are some pros and cons, however. You get a work-life balance, probably. You get to utilize a diverse skill set. There can be, although it's not guaranteed, an extra cash flow. You pursue things in which you have great passion. For instance, my nephew, you get to test drive for a shorter period things that might work for you, and it protects your future. So if we are looking at kind of challenging times, if we need to have that extra income, maybe there's things that we can do outside the normal regular work that doesn't overstep your main work. The cons, however, balance may be elusive. We may start to think we're kind of working 27 hours a day. There can be a lack of benefits, especially in terms of what we usually used to. Sonia's just asked in the everybody section, it sort of is. The side hustle is sort of is. It's part of that, but I think that's the side hustle is much more fleeting in terms of kind of a gig economy and that area. This is more kind of a more sustained and permanent piece. So I hope, Sonia, that is a bit more clarity. Increasingly, but not widely embraced yet. I think that is changing. Maybe it'll slow up during the downturn in the economy the next 18 months or so. Maybe it will increase. But the point is, portfolio careers aren't for everyone. I don't think they would work particularly for me yet. Maybe when I retire, they might. But it's something to consider in terms of overall engagement with your career. Okay, so we're nearly at our time. The areas I think we should look at are who we talk to. while no single conversation is guaranteed to change the trajectory of a career, a business, or a relationship or a life, any single conversation can. So in talking to other people, I think we start to verbalize our own challenges and our own concerns. So again, training, another 4-box matrix. Are we speaking to the right people? So when you're looking at developing your career, even asking for advice, what is the level of commitment and support that this person can give you, and what influence, direct or indirect, can this person have on what your choices might be? So let's take a look. Box number 1, where there's low commitment and support, but high influence. This is a key area. What can you do to increase this person or this group of people's commitment and support? Are these people some people you need to connect with more? Box number 2. These are the people who have high influence and high commitment and support. Maintain their support, continue to communicate them with them, and ask kindly how that they can influence others for you. I think for me, I'll just put these up on the board. For me, these are real, what I would call advocates. And I can't type. Advocates. These are people who can give you advice. They can be allies to you in giving that advice, but they could also figuratively knock on a door and introduce you to other people, and, to change the analogy, start waving flags for you as well. So box 1, who are the people who you need to be more in front of or connect via others? Box number 2, they can be your advocates, maybe introduce you to people in box number 1, but certainly give you that allies advice and guidance. Box number 3, low level of commitment and low level of influence. I've got there, leave these at present. I think these are people who you can rely on to give you kind of general support. So my best friend, David, known him for 40 years, best man at my wedding, who works in a completely different industry, but there have been times over my career when we've sat down over a coffee and gone, both of us have said, well, tell me about what's going on. What do you think is good? What's good about this? And that, because they've no skin in the game, they can, other than they are friends with you, they can give you that kind of distant approach as well. Oh, it sounds to me that might work, might not work. And then finally, people who are enthusiastic about you, could have a real influence in the future, maybe continue to build in this area. So they are on your side, as it were, but they don't have that direct impact yet. But keep these warm. There's a person, he used to be my boss, and then he went freelance, that I often contact because his networking skills are extraordinarily good. And when I've had challenges in my career, maybe being let go due to reorganization and so on, I'll just get on the phone to him in particular, and he's going, okay, these are the changes. These are the people you need to talk to. I can introduce you to this person. They don't have a great influence, but they've got that enthusiasm. Which brings us almost to the end of today's session. I said before, it would be divided into 3 areas, looking at kind of you, the person, your interests, looking at how the world of work is changing, and then looking at who are the people you need to be speaking to. And when you come to speaking to those people, some 6 or so bullet points on what does great look like for you. What am I asking for? Am I asking the right question? What's my brand at the moment? That is, how am I profiled? What are my strengths? What shortcomings should I be wary of or start to build? Sorry, I've just still got that piece there. So when you're thinking about talking to any of these people in those 4 boxes, where would you start? And so thank you. In the last minute, it's time to wrap up. I know when we're working with big groups, like I think we had nearly 80 people at one point, it's difficult to get to that interaction. I really thank you for posing some questions, both in the chat and in the Q&A. But what are you going to take as a result of this? Susie, I think if somebody's just asked there, am I able to send you an email, please, or is there a contact? I think if you go via Graham, if you're still with us, somebody wanting to get in touch with us. I'm not quite sure whether that should be me or someone.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'm going to send everyone a follow-up email with your slides, and anyone who wants to then contact you, Russell, you can probably do it through me, and I'll have
perfect.
a data capture form set up.
Yeah, I didn't want to get kind of quite a few emails, but I just wish you all the very, very best. Thank you. Take time building your source stories, take time thinking about what your interests are, and take time kind of working out what's really important to you. So thank you very much, and hopefully speak in the future. Take care now.